Hi everyone and welcome back to the Colour Cave, where we like to play with art stuff. Today we are exploring another computer game character that has impacted or influenced my life in some way, and this one in particular was from a long time ago, but it has stuck with me and it's also retained some relevance, and you'll see why when I explain throughout the video. Struggled a little bit with this one, but always get there in the end. At the end, I do flip through quickly just so that you can see the ones that I've been doing off camera, because I did say I wasn't going to do all of them, otherwise this series would last for eternity. So I'm just going to go to top down view and you can see what I did. Let's get going. Tea. The reason that this character has made my list and essentially into this book is quite interesting. The game that it originally came from, which was Resident Evil 2, was brought out in, I think, around 1998 or something, somewhere near that, 1996. And the first instalment of the game was in the same genre, which is a survival horror. And I never played that first game because by the time I took an interest and I was old enough to be interested in things like that, the second one had been brought out and the controls were much better on it, so I opted to play for the second one. And this is one of the first, what I would call truly threatening enemies in the game, and that's not the reason that it's made it into this sketchbook, because there could be a gajillion other ones that I could have put in its place. But the first time I played this game, and when you get started, obviously things start quite gently, and it's just sort of, there's a couple of zombies limping about and you can sort of shove them out the way and that kind of thing. Your first encounter with this licker is when you are heading into a doorway in the corner of a room, and on the opposite wall, so like kitty corner to the door, is a window. And as you're running to go and open the door, this thing scuttles over the window. So you don't see it in its entirety and it doesn't stop. You just see it skittering past the window. And that is the singularly most terrifying moment. That's the first time I had genuinely been scared by a computer game. So that's how the licker has ended up in this book. Just before I got started inking there, you can see just past, I tested out some colours to make sure that I had the ones that I wanted, and it's always a good idea to do that if you're going to be working in marker, just to save yourself any hassle or making any mistakes and bad choices before you get going. So the licker is basically a genetically modified human. It's picked up the zombie virus and it's mutated. So you can see from the proportions of the head, it is quite humanoid in terms of being a monster, if you like. And the thing that it does, it crawls about on all fours and it kind of like whips you with its tongue. So this is where this great big tongue comes from. And they do have quite sharp teeth as well, which I imagine wouldn't be too comfortable. When I started picking the colours, I struggled with it a little bit, and the thing that I wanted to get was to make sure you could see the depth in the tongue, because it's quite a sort of complex shape, shall we say. So I did spend a lot of time on it and I kept going back to it. I kept looking at it and thinking, oh, I could just add a little bit more of this pink here or this pink there. I find it quite amusing with games like this, and I think that nostalgia definitely sort of clouds your judgment on certain games. I remember that these were, they were pretty terrifying looking. And more recently, Resident Evil 2 has been remade and remastered for the modern day consoles. And looking at the lickers in the new game is equally, if not more terrifying. But one of the things that it made me do was it made me want to go back and play the original just to see how bad the graphics really were. And when I did that and came to the aforementioned point near the start of the game where the licker scuttles across the window, I actually laughed out loud because the graphics are that bad, and it was basically just a couple of pixely blobs wandering over the window, so that was quite entertaining. In the new one, they are rendered so beautifully. They've changed the game slightly, which disappointed me because you don't get that first encounter of them going like over the window in the new version. So that kind of like burst my bubble a little bit because I was kind of like anticipating that. But they are still as terrifying now in 2019 as they were in 1996. I had jumped between the idea of doing the entire body of the liquor or just doing this sort of headshot, and I feel as if I wouldn't have been able to get the detail in, particularly in things like the tongue, if I had made it, you know, the whole body, just because of the size of the paper, the limitations of the notepad. Here I'm starting the teeth, and I ended up, when I put that down, it just didn't look as if I'd actually put any colour on the paper. So I just kind of left it alone, and I had a think about it. I went and ruminated on it for a little while, and I ended up going back to the teeth later on. Inside the mouth, I wanted it to be dark because I wanted to give that sense of depth, but I didn't want to lose the colour scheme that was there. So rather than just doing the inside of the mouth black, I opted for a really, really dark red. I think it was R89, don't quote me on that, but that really gave me the option to blend in the paler colours around the edge of the tongue into this sort of dark abyss area as well. And again, it's one of those things that once I sat back, and you'll see it in just a little while, I wasn't entirely satisfied with my decision to do that, and I decided to change it a little bit. So one of the characteristics of the skin of this monster is that they're quite sort of leathery looking. You know, they almost look as if they've been embalmed, or either that or they've just been out in the sun for years and years. So I had to decide on how I was going to indicate the highlights in, you know, the sort of raised areas of the skin. The automatic reaction to that is to leave it white and then darken down from there, but the features of it are quite dark anyway. So I opted for that sort of pale skin tone as a starting point, and then sort of built the colours up round about it, preserving that highlight, which was the palest colour. And that worked really well on the bottom lip there, and I was quite surprised because I thought it would just sort of disappear. And I did want it to be subtle because obviously you don't want it to, you know, stick out like a sore thumb. But my judgment was good on that, and it's one of the first times I've done something like that with markers, and I've been satisfied that I've actually made the right decision. And not only that, but it's given me the effect that I had in my head. So that is definitely a tick against that we're improving with Copic markers. One of my concerns with this piece was having the scope and the colours basically to get the skin tones the way that I wanted. And it didn't take me long actually to realise that my collection has been built up quite slowly over maybe a year or so. And it's kind of crept up on me, but I actually have a lot more selection in my Copic markers than I thought I did. So once I started sort of playing around, I very quickly got the colours that I needed, and in the E group of colours, which is the earth tones, which includes the skin tones and things, there is an absolutely colossal number of those markers available. The choices are pretty much endless really, and I only have a very small portion of that E group of colours, and I was really surprised that I had everything I needed to get the tones that I wanted for our handsome chap here. So that was something else that I learned, and it made me sit down and look at my Copic markers and actually see and appreciate how many that I've got now and how much flexibility it gives me when I want to do a Copic illustration. So that was quite nice as well. But I have found that blending colours and mixing colours, you don't actually need an awful lot of these markers to get the majority of what you want. Now we all know that you can create any colour from 3 primary colours, but it's just not that straightforward when you're trying to do a marker illustration, let's be realistic. But with a little bit of practice and a little bit of experimentation with a basic set of colours across the available colour groups, you can pretty much get everything you want. It's just a case of taking the time and having a wee bit of patience to sit down and do that. And that was something that I learned from this today as well, because most of the skin tones are actually mixed together, and you'll see as I go through the different pens that I'm using and the fact that I'm blending them together, and that's what really gives you the effect. It's not the clean plain colour of one particular marker that does the job. So just to touch on the blending technique that I'm using, basically while the marker that I have laid down is still wet, I'm going in with my next colour. So I tend to do that, and I start with the darker colour first, and then I go back over with whatever I've used for the base colour and blend it out. And you can see that area under his chin, which is sort of down under his neck, that's exactly what I did there. I had my base colour, which was just a flat layer of, I think it was E34, and then after that I used the darkest colour to mark in where I wanted the contours and thing, and then just blended it out with that lightest colour. And I've done that all over. Sometimes you need a few layers, and you know, that's okay, and you can go back over. But if you're using high quality marker paper like this Copic paper, then it will take a lot, and you can saturate the paper, and it lets you blend it in really smoothly and gives you that nice result without leaving streaks behind from your markers. I've gone back in with my darkest colour here, and I'm just marking in some detail. It's important that you make sure that your previous layer is absolutely bone dry, because if you don't, it will start to sink in and you will lose the definition of the detail that you're trying to put in, because it just starts to blend in with the wetter colour underneath. So I suppose it's like a sort of quicker version of watercolour. You've got to wait for the layers to dry, but again, if you're using good paper, the alcohol should soak into the paper quite quickly, and it does dry reasonably fast. But it's just something to be aware of if it's something that you are wanting to do. The structure and the skin of these creatures, it's as if they've had their skin peeled off, and underneath is where you can see all the connective tissue and muscle. I don't know, most of you will probably remember from maybe high school or secondary school, you used to get the models in the biology department, and it was like a mannequin, and you could sort of peel them off in layers. So when you took off the top layer, there was all the muscles, and then you pulled them off and was all the internal organs, and then eventually just the skeleton. So it's kind of like basically taking the first layer, the top layer off of this mannequin. That's what's underneath, but it's just sort of mutated slightly in an interesting shade of brown. That was a terrible analogy, but I hope that kind of gives you an idea in your head of what this is supposed to look like. So here I am still struggling away, and I'm entirely not happy about using this colour for the teeth. While I was doing this, it was at this point that I realised that my perspective was slightly off around the top edge of that jaw. It should have, that side of his face should have been slightly more skewed because of the angle that we're looking at him. So this keeps happening to me, and I really don't know how I'm going to remedy this before I start inking, because I always seem to notice these things once it's too late, particularly when I'm doing ink drawings. And it's something that I'm going to have to figure out a way to remedy, because I'm ending up with a lot of pictures that 95% of it looks correct in terms of the proportions and the perspective, and then I have a tiny little corner of an image that's just not right, and it kind of knocks off the whole piece. So if anybody has any suggestions for that, please let me know in the comments. I would greatly appreciate it. But I just find it really odd that when I'm drawing in pencil, I seem to notice it before I get to that sort of finishing off stage, whereas when I'm working in ink, I just don't. It's as if I'm blind to it. Moving on to the brain here, this was by far the most difficult part for me in terms of trying to get the sense of depth in between all the different little sections of the brain. And it's one of those ones where I just sort of worked away at it and let it sit for a bit, and kind of contemplated it, and then went back and added some more marker and added some more marker. And I do think that's the key if you're looking for depth, particularly in a semi-realistic aspect. It's important that you do build it up in layers, because that's what's going to give it to you when you're working like this. Here I'm back to using the technique that I used earlier after I've done some blending and just sort of made things look a bit more 3D. I've gone back in once everything's dry and added in some details just with one of the darker colours, and it's made the top lip pop, which is good. That's what I was aiming for, but it just gives that little bit more interest and depth into the actual picture itself. So here I go, starting to try and build up that depth with one of the sort of paler pink colours. I think that was R21. And I'm just trying to give that sense of the curvature on the head on the top of the brain. And then I'm starting to add in some of the detail lines. And again, I was kind of using that as a base layer for the detail. And those lines were going to become darker eventually, like I'm starting to do here. And I ended up with the darker marker had, hey, that rhymes, darker marker. The darker marker had covered over the pale pink, so I took it back in before it was completely dry, and I just smudged in a little bit of that paler pink there around each of those lines, which helped to give me that sort of contrast, but also that sense of depth around each section. So I was pretty pleased that that method was working for me, and I went on to use it and sort of build on it a little bit the further along I got with the brain. So one of the things about playing the Resident Evil games, or for that matter any other survival horror games, is that you get quite immersed in them, and I find that happens more with video games than it does with watching a film, and I think it's because you are actively participating. I think it's just more immersive, and that's one of the reasons I really like playing video games, is that sense of dropping yourself into a world and becoming very involved in it. And I'm sure it's the reason most people play video games. And one of the things with these games is when you've been playing for a little while, I think it just kind of like sparks your imagination a little bit more, and it can make you quite jumpy and quite paranoid. And as youngsters, obviously, that came in very handy for scaring your siblings and your friends. And quite often we would wait until someone was playing the game and we would go and sneak up on them and intentionally give them a fright, because they would jump about 6 feet in the air. It was a much better scare than if you were just, say, like hiding behind a door waiting for someone. So that was a never-ending source of amusement for us, particularly as teenagers, and having an older brother. I love to get one up on my brother just by giving him a fright, basically. So the genre continued to flourish after that, and more games were brought out, and now it's, ironically or not, the survival horror genre has survived, and it's doing pretty well for itself now. As an adult, I still like to play survival horror games, but I tend not to play them when it's dark and I'm on my own, because every single little noise in the house makes you jump, and you can't help it. It just happens. So that's something that seems to have changed, because as a young teenager or old child, whichever way you want to look at it, I had no issues with playing these games in the dark with no one else in the house or whatever. It was something that I just genuinely didn't think about. So it's quite funny how my perception of things has changed over time. Either that or my overactive imagination has just got more overactive over the years. I don't know. If you guys played games like this when you were young, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, whether you were scared out your wits or whether you just kind of took it in your stride. I'm quite pleased with how he's turned out, apart from his wonky mouth, so I just signed it at the bottom. Here is where we're up to so far. We have Mario and we have Fantasy World Dizzy, our liquor, and lastly there was Purple Tentacle from Day of the Tentacle. Anyway, I hope you have enjoyed this video. If you have, please give it a thumbs up, and here's some similar videos if you want to continue watching. You can smash that subscribe button if you haven't done so already, and we shall see you back in the cave on the next video. Have a good day, everyone.